I'd like to welcome each one of you tonight and thank you for coming. This is our fourth Meadows Valley Memories evening, and our topic tonight is early New Meadows. Our panelists for this evening are Nita Branstetter, Margery Gilderoy, Heber and Alice Pangman. Our moderator is historian Dale Fisk from Council. You might wonder how we got from early settlers to early New Meadows. And we know that there's a lot of history in between, and we promise you that we will get back to it. We will do as we have done in previous evenings and take a short break partway through this, and you can view the pictures and the memorabilia that you have been so kind to bring and share with us. And also, then you can enjoy those cookies. Please sign our guest list, which is going around the room on an orange clipboard. And I want to once again thank Dale Fisk and this evening's panelists and ask you to please welcome them.
I guess we're going to start off with Alice Pangman. Your maiden name is Wilson, right? And you have some information about your family history in your valley, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's start off with you then.
I'm Alice Wilson Pangman. My mother was May Johnson Wilson, and she married Henry Wilson. And I'm the granddaughter of Ted and Maud Johnson, who came here from England. Harry and Ted Johnson were brothers and worked in England. Ted was a stonemason and Harry was a carpenter. And they crossed London Bridge every day to work on construction in London. And I'm sure today, if they could only see the London Bridge in Lake Havasu, Arizona, they would be truly amazed that it came to America even as they did. Harry was 2 years older, and he was rather adventurous, and he went to South Africa first, and then came back and talked Ted into coming to the United States with him. So they came by ship to Boston, and then by train to Salt Lake City, where they worked on the final stages of building the Hotel Utah. Then went on to Weezer, where they worked on the Washington Hotel. Some of you may remember it. It was a fairly ornate building, quite a landmark in Weezer until it was burned, or mostly burned, in 1973. From there, they heard there was construction in Meadows Valley, so they came by train up here. I believe it was in 1913, but it might have been the end of 1912. And they worked for George Brinson, who had built the Hi-Ho Hotel and the railroad depot. And they worked on various construction projects in New Meadows and also residential homes around the valley. And I believe one of them was the original Osborne home, which still stands up there today. And when construction fell off in the valley, they decided to go into, or stay in the valley, because they liked it here and didn't want to move on anymore. So they went into logging and farming. But Harry, he came with his wife Ethel and 2 children, William and Mabel. And the year after they came, his wife died in childbirth. And he was left with 2 children alone. And remembered a lady that he had known for quite a long time in London, and wrote to her to see if she would come and be his wife and help him to rear the 2 children. So after considerable thought, she did come by herself from London on the ship and the train to Meadows Valley, and they were married, and had another daughter, Agnes, later. Harry was an early leader in the Methodist Church. At that time it was the Episcopal Church. And he rented farms. And one year, he had a big bumper crop of hay. It was in 1923. So when it was all harvested, there were several stacks. But a machine set one of the stacks on fire, and before it was over, all of the hay had burned. And soon after that, he bought a farm, which is on Farrell Lane. Now that property is occupied by Frank and Mary Sweet, but the small white house that is next to their home is Harry and Annie's original home. They both died during the 1950s. Ted and his wife Maud had 2 children, May, who was my mother, and her brother Fred. And May and Harry's daughter Mabel were in the first graduating class of Meadows Valley High School in 1928. And May married Henry Wilson, and they had 2 children, myself and my brother Edward. And she had a brother Fred. Fred became a minister and married a lady from Ohio, and he lived in the Midwest and did not live in the valley anymore after that. And Ted's wife, Maud, died in 1940 after he had bought a farm on South End Road. I believe that place is now occupied by McGarry's. And in 1949, up to that point he had never driven, and he thought automobiles were foolish. But in 1949, he decided to learn to drive, and he bought a truck and had a wonderful time driving. And 1949 was a big year for him, because on Christmas Day of 1949, then he remarried, and he married Catherine Mitchell. And she was the daughter of Andy Mitchell, and by coincidence, Dale has written a piece in the Adams County Record this week about the Mitchell family. So if you're interested in more about them, you can read it there. So Katie, as she was known, and my grandfather Ted lived in the Mitchell home, which was just east of, or still is, just east of the highway maintenance facility, now occupied by a Dick Foster. And Katie died in 1966, but my grandfather continued to live in that home until about the last 5 years of his life, when he lived with my parents, and he died in 1973 at the age of 91.
Okay. It's kind of interesting, you said George Brinson is who they worked for, and he built the Hotel Hi-Ho, is that right, and the Railroad Depot?
Yes.
He also built several buildings in council. I think he built the old theater and some of the other brick. He must have been a pretty good brick guy or something.
He must have been.
Yeah. Okay, so is that all you have for right now?
I think so.
Okay, well, that's interesting, thank you. Let's have the other panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about when and where you were born. Were you all born here, or did you come here to live later? None of you were born here, is that right? Okay, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to be here. Heber, why don't you start?
Thank you. I came over with the logging Boy Spit Lumber Company in 1940. I started working for them logging in 1936 in Cascade. In 1939, my youngest daughter, Roberta, was born in Cascade, and we moved over here the next spring. She's almost a native here. But I don't have much history for the real early times. It happened that I was born over Blaine County in a little farmhouse about 2 miles out of the small town of Gannett. And I'm sure most of you don't know that, but it's south of Sun Valley, about 25 miles. And it's a resort, retirement resort now. There's no functions there, there's no store or post office. One time though, they did have garage and service station, and lumber yard, and this mercantile store, and a drugstore, and post office, and everything. And they had quite a lively place there with 2 churches. But we moved over here in 1940, and I worked for the company then until 1950. I also have another daughter here that most of you might know. It's Colleen Moore. And I have 3 daughters down in the valley and a son in North Carolina. And I have to brag, I got the best family in the world. Anyway, when we came over about 1950, Carl Heber was running the store, and he asked me one day, he said, "How would you like to start working for the city?" And I said, "Well, you don't have anybody working for the city." He said, "I know, that's what we want to get started." And we talked over quite a while, and I finally decided to go to work for them. And when I went to work in May, they told me to start working and I wouldn't get any pay until the 1st of June. But if I stayed working there, then they'd let me have time off in the next month or so, whatever I wanted to make up for the time I worked. And that's the way it started. They didn't tell me that they had 5 dump trucks and a drag line and something all lined up for the next Monday morning to go to work on the streets and the ditches, and that's what I fell heir to. Anyway, it was an exciting time. They had dump trucks cleaning rocks off the road. And I want to tell you a little bit about the road. We came over here a little earlier to see if we could find a place to live. And they was getting stuck in the bog hole right out here on the highway there on Main Street. And there was a man here that had a big team of gray horses he used to haul logs with. He'd hook up his team, come down and pull them out one after another for 50 cents a piece. I remember that when they told us about it. And the streets were terrible. I mean, they had bog holes that in the spring when the frost come out, that mud would ooze up, and you had to be awful careful, and sometimes you couldn't even drive down the street. And that's what the city wanted to fix as much as they could. So we started cleaning out drain ditches and pulled rocks on the road, and they dug out a lot of these old places that was really bad and put a bunch of rock in them to kind of stabilize it. And I worked on that with that going, so that tried to keep track of them. I didn't know what they was doing, they didn't know what I was doing, but we got along pretty good. Anyway, about the time that we got all those rocks done, then they decided to haul gravel on the streets. Well, the city didn't have any equipment whatsoever. If they needed roads graded, they asked the company. The Branstetter lumber company had somebody come and blade the streets, and they come and plowed the snow, and they hired a part-time marshal that took care of what police work needed to be done. I fell heir to all this. I was a dog catcher and city police and maintenance, and collected water, and collected dog tax and everything like that. It was pretty exciting, I tell you. I got in some real difficult times with the dogs. And I tell you, we had a lot of dogs, because the first year they told me to start gathering up the licenses, I went around town and got licensed for all the dogs. We had 30 plus dogs there that didn't have any tags or nobody orders. We had to get rid of them, and that wasn't a very easy job. Fortunately, I had a friend, Ray Clausen, he helped me catch a lot of them. So we got rid of them. I'm not going to tell you how. But it ended up there that there was a city clerk, the city police, the dog catcher, road water maintenance, and all around work that had to be done. And Blake Hancock was the clerk. He showed me how to take care of the books, and Kenny Johnson was taking care of the water. They were board members and showed me where the water was. There wasn't any sewer here, and the they did get one later. But we started working, and then after we got through with this cleanup job, they started hauling gravel. And I was talking to Barney a little while ago. They was digging gravel out of the pit and loaded it in those big dump trucks and pouring it on there. They had a grader that was grading it out. And I don't know how many 100 tons of rock and gravel we hauled on these streets, but one instance out here on this lower end of town, Barney was driving the truck, and I think he told me he had a broken frame or something. Anyway, they went to dump the truck, and they got the bed clear up there, and it tilted to one side, and they tipped the whole thing right over. They had to take that out and get it fixed. Then in 1952, they decided they was going to try and put in a sewer. So far, most everybody had septic tanks, except when this logging company come in, they put their own sewer system in. And they had their sewer, but the city didn't. All this company town down here, as we call it, had sewer and water. So in 1952, they had a contract to lay some sewer line, and I was to take charge of that too and check on it, so on and so forth. And they done a pretty good job. The contractor started doing that. They started down by the river. The sewage went right into the river. There was no pond or nothing like that, or holding tanks or anything. And you know, you won't believe this, but I checked that outlet down there for 2 years and could never see a sign of any stuff coming out of that sewer line. They said that the inside of those cement pipes grounded up so that there was nothing left when it got to the river. So, well, at the same time that I started working here on this job, I was a financial secretary for the local union, the lumber and sawmills union, and I was also remodeling the house. That's what it was. So I kept very busy. They started this. If you let me a minute here. Oh, after about 1951, at about September 51, they heard that they might get a number 11 road grader with the narrow wheels in front from Brown Town, and they sent me over to see if I could see it from Brown's at McCall. And I went over and looked at it, and I thought it looked pretty good, but we didn't have anything. It would be better than nothing. So they bought it, and I brought it back. It used to have a steering wheel on, but in the meantime, they'd hooked the steering up to one of those levers that raises and lowers the blade, or sideways or something. I don't know how they did it, but I drove it down the canyon that way, and it got going, and I didn't know how to steer it. I almost put it in the creek, but I got the brakes worked on it. But then later on, then we found that's all we had to grade with or plow snow or anything those first years. And I found a wing, or heard about a wing attachment down in Boise, and they sent me down and I looked at that and I thought that'd be a good deal, so they bought it and had it and we put that on. That was the way we plowed snow in the wintertime and graded the streets in the bed. Anyway, the county had a number 11 road grader at the same time, and we worked together. They had a big V plow, and the front of my grader had a flat plate for a push bar. So when we got in deep snow, he'd put the V blare down, and I'd let the wing out, and I'd get behind him, and we'd get those two in second gear, and we sure plowed snow out. Sometimes all night long, keep it going. I had some figures down here someplace if I could find them, but in the winter of '52, they measured each snowfall, somebody, I don't remember who, and as of in May, I think it was, they had 131.5 inches of snowfall at that time, and it snowed some after that. Of course, the fence posts were completely covered. 2 different years while I lived here. They had a lot of snow. And I got that patrol going. Later on, George Wilson had a big ranch out here, had an old dump truck that he didn't use, and so we looked at that and they decided to buy that. Went and got that, and it took a lot of fixing too, because it was kind of old. And that's the way we started on these streets. And they dug out these holes and they broke a couple of water lines while they was fixing the ditches that they had to fix. And then when they put the sewer in, they started in digging and worked it back from the deep end on back till they got down here. And they had a little trouble down on this north side up here because it was really wet, and they decided to raise the sewer line about 2 feet. So that they thought they had enough elevation that they could get it all buried just about right. But when they got down to this last end down here, some of those drain lines that went from the house was just a spade deep. They didn't work out too good, but they finally got them fixed. And then the people didn't want to hook on. There's only about a third of them. That was my job to go around and convince them that they should get on this sewer line. That was a lot of fun too. That was like collecting dog tax. They didn't have any stop signs or speed signs, and they decided that some of the drivers was going too fast, and so I had to make a bunch of speed signs, 15 mile, 20 mile an hour speed sign, and paint them up. And this started to work on this sewer system. In August of '52, the job was finished October 9th. And like I said, there was no lagoons for several years later, after I had to quit working for the city. But when I remodeled the house, I added on a little room that we thought would be useful. It turned out to be the city office, so I had all the books and everything there, and that's where we held our board meetings. It worked out all right. I didn't have to go anywhere. I know sometimes we couldn't do anything, get the snow out with the patrol, and Joy's dad, Virgil Waddell, had a little cat, and he'd rent that to us, and I plowed lots of snow on the intersections to get them out. But they finally got that all done, and they got that sewer in, and after they got the sewer all fixed up, and that was my job mostly, was just maintaining the roads, breaking the roads, putting in the culverts wherever we needed to, hooking people onto the sewer line, and even some of them hadn't hooked onto the water system at that time. And after it got functioning pretty good, then we attached the Morgantown sewer line and the water lines to the city, so that the city furnished the water for all of them. That worked pretty good. They finally built this tank down here, and after they had that tank there for a few years, they had to clean it out and scrape it down and paint it inside because it gathered crud on the inside. I got in there and had to clean that down. I had a little vacuum cleaner, and I done a lot of work with that and scraped. And the last time we did that, they had a lid on the side there that we could get in. We went in there and got it all cleaned up and painted. This was by contract this time. I didn't do this. But I was helping Kenny Johnson tighten those bolts on this last place to get it filled. And it was kind of windy, and I had a long ladder that I had up in the tank so we could get up on the top. And the wind blew it over and hit me in the back of the head. Well, they said that I went out, but they said I talked to them, and I don't remember anything till we was going down the other side of the hill in McCall. I had a pretty good concussion, but it just happened to my knowledge. So.
Heber? Yeah, I got a question. The sewer pipe and the water pipe, what was the material used to make them?
And cement.
Was it cement? Okay.
Cement, it was, I think it was 12-inch on the main lines, and then they got down a little smaller on the other line. And it was all cement with bell on the top and gasket end. You put that gasket inside it and then slid them together
Oh,
and had it tested afterwards. It's pretty darn tight.
yeah,
I think they were either 4 or 5 feet long. They're pretty heavy.
yeah.
That's the way they did it. They got a good job. I think they did a good job. I knew this guy that was doing the work, and he hadn't done this before either, but they had a real good dragline operator that dug the trench, and he did very, very much at all. They kept it right on line, and they had an engineer that was here all the time to see about it too. They had to have a special engineer to okay this. But they finally got it going, and then they gravelled all the streets again. I don't know how many tons of gravel it was hit every year, it seemed like. They finally got a loader, and I was doing this by myself. And before I got the loader, every time the county would go down to pit to get gravel, I'd sneak in there and they'd load me too, so we got by pretty good. But the holes that was in these streets, you don't see them anymore. It might get a little soft in a place or two, but it sure did tighten them up. But they were something else. They just, the cargo into them, they just had to be pulled out. There's just no way about it. Well, toward the, after 5 years, I asked them for a raise. And they said, we can't afford it. And I said, well, I can't afford to work here because I'm going behind. I've got too big a family to feed and take care of. And so I told them I was going to resign. I decided to hire a neighbor, John Steckman. He was a grader operator for the logging company, and he knew the streets. But anyway, they turned it over to him. Doggone him. Within 6 months after he went to work, they'd given him $1 an hour more than I wanted. So that's the way it went. But I'm pretty proud of being a Meadows Valley resident. We left here in the late fall of 1998 because of the ill health of my wife. Went to Boise, and she only lived another year or so. Now that we're down there, Margery and I are inmates in the Heatherwood Retirement Center. And I get to see her, and also Ted and the other day that used to live here and had Fox Farm and Goose Creek store there and there. And Wally Pratt, his wife, that he used to work for the Highway District and had a home up the other side. He bought that little house Corky Craigbaum had first. They're in there, so we got lots of friends and relatives down there, and it's a real nice place. We enjoy it very much. Thank you.
What year was it that you stopped working for the city?
1955.
55.
Then I bought that hotel, the best hotel, the big hotel up here. We owned it for 7.5 years.
Is that the old Hi-Ho house?
Yep.
Oh.
That was their old hideout.
Yeah. Huh.
I bought that and finally traded it off for a ranch in Richfield and rented the ranch out till I finally sold it. I never did go down to work on it, though I hauled hundreds of posts down for it. But
Yeah. Do you remember what years it was that the snow was so deep?
1952 and 1949.
That's what I was thinking. For infamous years.
I remember those. They were dandies.
Well, Margie, do you have a story about how you arrived here in New Meadows? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born just out of Weiser on the Oregon side, and my folks moved up here when I was about 2 years old. I either was 2 or was going to be 2 shortly after I moved up here, and they moved on the Hamilton place. I don't know who owns it now and what it's known by.
And what year would that have been? About?
I was born in 17, so it'd been about 1919. And then they got a chance to buy this other place on across the valley. It was clear out at the south end of the valley. And they bought it and moved over there. And I went to school from there to Old Town to the school. And we had a little black pony that some people that lived here, they left it with Daddy and said if they ever come back, they wanted their little pony back. Well, that's the little horse that my brother and I rode to school. And in going to school the way we had to go 4 miles. And Daddy tried his best to get a road straight through on the fences, but they just wouldn't let it go. So we always went 4 miles. And then, I don't know what had happened to our little black pony, how come we had this other horse, but we was riding it to school and something had gone across the road and had left tracks. And when the horse got up there, it stopped. We got off, we tried to pull it across. We'd get back and take a run at it and try to go, and it would stop. And it would not cross that, whatever those tracks were. And we weren't about to be late, so we just turned around and went home. And then my aunt come up one year and lived with Mama and Daddy. And that year she took a little sleigh, and we drove in it when she took us to school in that. And then I went to Old Meadows School through my grade school. And during that time, we went back to Illinois. That's where my dad was born and raised. Went back there to see his foster parents for about 3 months. While I was back there, I went to the same school he went and took his lunch pail, and I really thought I was doing that. And Georgiana Waddell, I guess everybody knows her by now, but McMahon was my teacher for 2 years. Then when I got old enough to go to high school, I stayed with my aunt and uncle in town here, and then on weekends I would go home. And I just went through high school. I didn't go any further. And then I got married in 1930. I graduated in 36, and got married in 37, and then my son was born in 38. And we lived in New Meadows here. The house is still there, the little house we bought. It was just a little 2-room house when we bought it, and he built on a front and back porch and a bedroom. And as the 2 children got older, we put one on each porch for a bedroom and glassed it in and made them a bedroom in it, and they slept there.
Now, your husband was Fred, is that
Fred
right?
Gilderoy,
And where was he from? Was he from around here, or?
No, he was from around Weiser. He was born in Idaho on this side. It's not too far from where the highway goes now that he was born.
Mm-hmm. And did you meet here?
Yes, that's where I met him, was here.
Okay. And did he, what did he do for a living? What did you guys do?
Well, he went to Weiser. That was when Virgil was just a baby, and worked for a friend down there. He used to live up here. Jones was the last name. And he went down there and worked for him one summer. And then Daddy had called up and said that he could get on the Forest Service. So he turned around and come back, and he worked for the Forest Service. I don't know whether he worked a full year or part of a year. And then when the company moved in, why, he went to work for them. Then the first year I was old enough to vote, I didn't know that we had to go a few days before election to register. So we come in to vote. Well, I couldn't vote because I wasn't registered. So then I registered right after election. And that's when I became a registrar and worked on the election board for 52 years.
What year was that when you started?
Oh gee, when you gotta get asking me.
Who was running for president when you couldn't vote?
I don't know either. I should remember that, but I don't. But,
So you did that for 50, how long?
52 years.
52 years.
And the last year I had it, I had started the registration, and that's when I sold my place up here and moved to Weiser.
Do you
So
remember what year was that?
It's been about 9 years ago, I think I
Oh.
was. I'm not sure.
So
It
you
hasn't
were-
been too awfully long ago.
So you were the registrar until you moved, right?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
And when the company moved in, I did real good because there was all these company people, and back that time, a lot of the people that was running for elections, they would come get you and take you around and get people signed up, so I really had a big registration that year. I thought I was really doing it.
Yes. And then where did you move to?
I moved to Weiser after I sold my place here and lived in a very nice apartment there. And that's where I was going to stay because I had a sister that lived at Weiser. She's about 14 years younger than I am. And I practically raised her. I was so proud of her because that's what I wanted, was a little baby sister. I had a brother 5 years younger than me, but I didn't care for him at all. But Betty, she was something different. So I moved to Weiser, and then my eyesight began failing me. And I had to give up my home because I got to where I couldn't see the stove and see things. So I moved into a nursing home there in Weiser. It was a new home, but it was strictly a nursing home, and I didn't need a nursing home. And because they did nothing for me, they took my pills away from me, but I had to remind them 2/3 of the time to give them to me. But I could care for myself, and there was only 2 people I could talk to that had enough mind to talk, and you could talk to. And I told my son that if I stayed there much longer, I'd be acting just like them. So he'd been wanting to get me over to Boise, and because his mother-in-law was living in this home over in Boise where he and I are. And so we put my name in, and I wasn't very long in getting in over there. And it was really a wonderful place to stay at. Because you have to be able to take care of yourself. It isn't a nursing home. They have all kinds of entertainment and things for you to do if you can see to do them. Hester and I, that's my son's mother-in-law. She's practically blind too, and so we take in everything we can see and do, but there's a lot of it we can't do.
I have a note here that something about that your husband Fred said something about the bricks for the Oddfellows Hall came from someplace locally. Was it out of Tommy Carr's ranch? Do you remember where those bricks came from for the Oddfellows Hall?
For the Oddfellows Hall? No, I don't know.
Heber, that was before your time.
I heard later that they had a big factory down toward Riggins, and I'm sure it was true because when I had the hotel one night, a fellow come and stayed all night with us, and he looked all around and he said, "This is still the same as it was." And I said, "You've been here before?" He said, "I run a team and I can haul brick for this hotel there and some other buildings."
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, well, Nita, you need to use mic here. Tell us the story of your early life. Where were you born and how did you arrive here?
Well, I was born in Cuna, down the other side of Boise. And my dad started working for the Fish and Game Department, became game warden, so we moved to New Meadows. That's been almost 60 years ago, so I sort of feel like a native.
Yeah.
And of course went to school here, married, and had my family.
And your dad he was a game officer, is that?
Game warden.
Game warden, yeah.
I don't know, they probably call them something different than game wardens nowadays,
Well,
but.
I think they still do.
And,
So So, about what year was that, you think, that you moved here?
In the late 40s,
Late 40s.
or 47 actually.
And how old were you about that time? Were you still in school?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I went to Beaumont School over here. Had all 8 grades in the school, 2 grades to a room. And that was in the 8th grade.
Mhm. Who were
And that
some?
was the last year before they consolidated. There was a school out at Middle District, which is on my property. School isn't there now, of course. And a
Where was
school at,
that? Where was that school at exactly?
well, you know where the 45th parallel
Right.
is? Well, it's 2 miles, I guess. And it's right in the same field that the 45th parallel is next to.
Which side of the highway?
On that side.
The east side?
Yeah.
And that was called what, the middle?
Middle District
Middle District?
School.
Was it a one-room type school?
Oh, no. It was a big school.
Really?
Yeah, it was established in 1889, and then, let's see, they built it right after the turn of the century, the new school. And it was a great big 2-story white building. And they even had high school in it for, in the late teens, early 20s. The high school was out there. They hadn't established a high school yet here in town.
Was it a wooden building, I suppose?
Yeah.
And what was there before? You said there was a school. Was it a one-room school before that? Or was it a...
Looks like a fairly good-sized school, but it could have been just one room, I don't know. I've seen pictures of it, the first school.
Do you know if there's any pictures left of it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I have quite a few pictures of that era. I guess we're going to do a program on schools.
Yeah. Great.
And anyway, when I went to school over there in Beaumont, that was the last year before consolidation. And there was a school at Meadows, the one at Middle District, Beaumont, and one at Tamarack. And they consolidated, and then they got the bus route also. But 4 different schools here.
Okay, so you, after school, what did you do? When were you married?
In 1950.
And what was your husband's name?
Charlie Branstetter. Now, his family had been here since, well, his mother's family came, homesteaded in 1910, and his dad came in 1910.
So you guys have a ranch, is that what he did?
Yeah, well, for a number of years. He eventually went into logging and then worked at the sawmill. That's where he hadn't retired yet when he died.
So where did you work at Tamarack, or where did you
At
work?
the Tamarack
Yeah.
sawmill.
Mhm.
He worked there for 25 years, I guess. Before that, I was on the ranch.
What are some of the memories you have of when you first came here, of the town and what it was like and how things have changed?
Well, when I first came here, we moved here in 1st of June, and it rained solid for 2 weeks. And I wasn't real sure about that. Everything was beautiful because everything was so lush and green, you know. But
I bet the streets were muddy.
I tell you, he talked about the holes in the streets. They were pits, they weren't just holes. People would have to park their cars clear up here on the highway.
Yeah.
They couldn't drive down the street in Company Town especially.
Really?
Anyway, we moved and right kitty corner across the street from Rich's, Peeps family. So I knew all the Rich girls and their brother and so forth. We were good friends. And we lived there for a year or so. And then my folks rented Mrs. Evans' house, which is just the first house on the other side of the depot.
Who were some of the storekeepers? I suppose the LaFays, Mr. LaFay was Clarence, is he still around?
Oh, yeah.
Who were some of the other people running businesses at that time?
Well, Carl Shaver had the store where Brown's Market is now. And they built the store where Meadows Valley Market is. When I first moved here, it was just a cement slab from when the old garage burnt down.
What garage was that?
The Meadows Valley garage. I've got pictures of it here.
Yeah.
And Herb Fitz ran the drugstore where the doctor's office is now. Hazel Wisdom had the beauty shop where it's between the Kahili and the doctor's office. There was her shop and home and so forth, which it later became the drugstore. Let's see, where the bank was Witherspoon's pool hall and barber shop. We had 2 pool halls and barber shops in town. And down the street beyond LaFay's was the hotel was the first one, and Jackson was the one that owned that. He also played in the band over at Casey's Corral. It wasn't Casey's Corral quite yet, but it was the same place.
Yeah.
And then there was the building between that and McDonald's.
It was Crabtree store.
Well, it wasn't Crabtree's store.
The later?
I think. Yeah. There was a store. Was it? I don't remember that. I remember just being a building there, and I know there were things in it after that, but I don't recall.
Wasn't that Jim Sullivan's store?
Originally, yeah. And then on the other side of the doctor's office, there was a restaurant. There were a few little mistakes on this. They talked about when the Chinese restaurant and in this gift shop, but when I came here, Brooks owned the restaurant. There was a restaurant on one side and a store on the other, and they lived in back. And Roberta told me that the people by the name of Gabika owned it before them. And then after Brooks sold it, they sold it to Una and Al Richards. And I worked for them, so I remember that very well. I don't know how long they had it. Jim Witherspoon had the Pine Knot Cafe, and I worked over there too. But anyway, when Al and Una Richards bought the Pine Knot, then they are the ones that enlarged it.
Was it always called the Pine Knot?
I think so. That's all I ever knew it as, Pine Knot.
How far back does that name go? How far back does that name go? How early?
That time she was talking about when they required that they built that Pine Rock Cafe.
Yeah.
It was already here when I came here.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, Dixon's bought the cafe from Al and Una, and they're the ones that moved in George Wilson's house.
It was right next to it, right?
Yeah. And then down here, I think, well, there's a picture of the new telephone company office that was built in 33, 34. And I think it was right over here on this side of the street, the same side where,
On the south side?
yeah, south side of the street. And incidentally, this labeled IOF Hall, that was originally the bank. In the IOF Hall, I have a picture of that too. It was up on Main Street on top of Meal upstairs and was probably well, I think there was a hotel there at one time, next to Sullivan's.
Where would that be now? What would the location of that be?
Where the I.O. Hall used to be.
Yeah.
Well, where the sagebrush and stuff is now. See, that's all. The pool hall was right on the corner was the garage, and then LaFay's pool hall, and then next was the hotel, and then Sullivan's store, and McDonald's bus stop. But that was originally the Davenport Cafe. That was Edna Higgins' parents that had that before Scotty and Ida got it.
Now, you said something about a shop slab when you first started talking about the town.
Yeah,
What was that shop?
Where the shop, their garage burned. And it was a big brick building.
Yeah. Where was that?
It's where the Meadows Valley Market is
Oh,
now.
And what kind of shop was it? Who owned it?
Irwin was one, Chester Irwin. Yes.
Chester,
Now,
I
what-
worked in it.
My uncle had a logging company and worked up here, around here for a year or so, and then another uncle worked for him in that garage. So that evidently the logging company had rented it or something.
Doing repairing trucks and
Yeah.
things like that.
Cats, what have you. Anyway, he said they'd leave them running all night long, keep them going. For some reason, I wouldn't think they'd freeze up in the building because they surely had stoves and stuff, but that's what he said.
Huh.
And then it was, I don't know when that burnt down, because it had been long time.
Okay, well, it's getting to be close to break time, but how about some questions? Anybody have questions from the audience for any of the panel members so far on what we've covered? Yeah.
I'm not that familiar, but where was the company town, and is it still there, or are the buildings still there? Or?
All this section down here, that first big two-street section was all company town. She started telling me about this mud stuff. I think the first time I was up here, somebody was talking about that, and I had a friend that worked for the logging company. When they came in here, had a lot of low ground, high ground. They took a dozer and a grader and spread it all out, and they got a lot of real good black soil on top, and then they moved in and set these houses down. Most of them was on logs. They didn't have permanent foundations. And then one time she talked about that rain. This friend of mine, I think I told before, he went out to get his child one night, and he said he had to wash 17 before he found his. Another thing that he's talking about, these service stations, I remember on that intersection up there was a service station or a garage or something on all four corners. Bain's garage was over here, the Conoco station, and that's where Dorsey Water had these big tanks that he's delivered fuel all around the country. He had a dealership that was also kind of in with Kenny Johnson on the Chevron station.
What corner was that on?
That was on that northeast
Northeast.
of that intersection.
Where the crossroads.
On the southeast, there used to be a station there, believe it or not, and that little cafe. It didn't last too long, but there was one there. Plus this one that's right down the street here.
Yeah.
So they had and then they had the Texaco station up on the opposite street from that big hotel, just on, still got that cabins there.
Yeah. Now, who ran these places, these garages, these service stations that you remember?
Well, the one that's over on this east corner, west corner, was Harold Bain's
That's down.
garage. No, that's right on the opposite. If this is the intersection, this is right here.
Okay, the northeast.
He was right there. And then the Sheridan station was right across the street here, and when I was here, Kenny Johnson was running that and owned it. And Dorsey had charge of this, but I'm not sure who run that station most of the time, but mostly it was a storage for his oils and grease.
And was that south of the?
That was over across the street on the south. And then they had a little station, I don't even remember what kind of gas they had.
I thought
It
it was
didn't amount to
Conoco.
much. Pardon?
Conoco, I think.
Well, Conoco was in there.
There's a picture of that, in there someplace too.
And that was southwest of the actual intersection?
Yeah, it was down this.
Yeah, okay.
And then I always thought, Freeman's was Phillips station.
It was for a while.
Anyway, in that old picture, that's before the road was even paved over there. It says it's Standard Oil.
That's right. I was told that.
Yeah, there's a nice
It
picture
was-
of it there.
Johnson's station originally,
Charlie Johnson.
Charlie Johnson.
I think that could be he and his wife standing out there beside it. And I think Fred Clark maybe had that later sometime.
There was another cafe on the main street there between Fitz's drugstore and the food it's called Ray's Cafe.
Yes, Ray.
That was the main one for years and years here. It's called Ray's Cafe.
What was his name? I remember the guy, but
I don't know. I know the gal that run it because she never would pay her sewer bill or water bill. I'd have to go in there and get $1 a week out of her to get the bill paid.
I'm curious now, when the company town was here, when was it built? And I've got just a quick series that you may be able to quickly answer. Did they have their own schools? Did they control politics here? And what percentage of the community did they have in the company town?
Well, when they came in here, they just about doubled the population with all the workers. And they did put in their own sewer and their own water. And they had it there all the time. And eventually, like I told you, eventually they put the two systems together and it was all controlled by the city. But they had running water or sewer before the city did. And they put that in there when they moved over here in the spring of 1940. They railroaded that, they had a railroad over the mountain. And they brought that down here and they connected this railroad to this line. And at one time it made a complete loop. Those shays that they used for logging could go over, but a big locomotive couldn't go over. But they had that grade that went over this mountain down there, close to where Margery's parents used to have a ranch. And they built that especially to move it over, and the biggest share of it come over on that. And then they had some logging trucks that picked up some of the smaller buildings, and those buildings along Old Meadows up there on that side, a lot of them come on trucks. They put them down with a big lift.
Okay, well, Pete's about to run out of tape here, so we're going to take a break, and it's cookie time, and we'll take this up after the break. Well, one of the things we're going to do is go through and cover some things that the panelists forgot to say that they wanted to say. And Heber, you said you had some story about the hose cart, fire cart.
Yes, the first fire wagon here they had was a two-wheel trailer full of hose. And you had to hook onto it with the car and try to take it behind to the nearest fire hydrant they had. And then we'd have to lay out the hoses for 2 or 3 days to get them dried out. But that was their first fire wagon. Another thing I was going to talk about, don't remember the year, but while I was working for the city, slot machines became legal. And at one time here in New Meadows, they had 14 slot machines. And I collected the city tax and the state tax and the county tax, and I'd send the state and county theirs and keep ours, which is amounted to about $6,000 a year, and that's just what paid my wages.
And Margie, did you say you had forgotten to say something that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I should have told him that I was a Wyman. I think most people know what I was.
That was your maiden name?
Yes, my dad was Charles Wyman.
Okay. Somebody said that, was it you and Heber have both been keeping diaries for a long time?
Yeah, I started when I was in high school.
Really?
About the second year I was in high school, I think so, and I'm still keeping it. I don't know whether anybody can read it now or not, but because I can't see to see what I'm doing. So.
Did you keep any records of anything other than just personal stuff? Did you make notes about things?
Well, most of it was personal, but some of it is some of the other stuff. But I think back now, I wished I had kept more of the record stuff. But my mother-in-law, she had a diary. And gosh, I don't know how many years she had it, and she kept it up until she passed away. And I guess maybe that's one reason I kind of got started. Well, I started long before I got married.
Where's her diary now? Is it still someplace?
Verlene, my daughter, has it here.
Wow. How far back does it go, do you know?
Oh, I don't know when it started. I think shortly after she got married.
Now, does it have anything other than personal stuff in
Yes,
it?
she started out keeping track of their stock and things with calves and different things, and then later on it got into more of the personal. But they are very interesting to read. I used to read them when I could.
How about you, Heber? Did you keep a diary for a long time?
Yes, I started one in 1954, and I'm still keeping it.
Yeah.
Most of it was personal when I started out, but any major events like the Labor Day parades and Labor Day barbecue and stuff was always noted, or somebody flew to the moon or something, I always make a notation of something like that.
And Alice, you had something you were going to add.
Yes, I neglected to mention that the book, The Valley I Remember, that I imagine a lot of you read, and I think it's probably in the library here, was written by Harry Johnson's daughter, Agnes Johnson Ranney.
Yeah, there's a picture of her over there. You have a picture of her over there.
Yes, there's a picture of her over here on this poster. She was a school teacher in Portland for many years.
Okay, well, you must have come up with some questions during the break. One that I had, can't remember at the moment, but does anybody have any questions for the panelists? I know what it was. Sylvia, are we going to do one on schools? Is that one in the future? Because we had some very interesting things come up about the Middle District School, and there's a picture of the first one. I don't know if there's a picture of the second one or not. Does anybody know? Anyway, in that book that she was just talking about, there's a picture of the first school built in 1890 or something like that, and I guess it's still a granary. So when we get to the schools at one of these meetings, it sounds like that's going to be an interesting one. So, any other memories of things that you forgot to say or wanted to add to?
Heath, I wish you were still in charge of the dogs.
That was the best job I ever had. But they did have a lot of dogs here, and they was just roaming around without owners, without anybody, and getting best as could be. And we did get rid of 31 dogs the first year, and there's been 6 or 7 every year after that we had to put away.
Were they just
Still a bunch.
Pardon?
There's still a bunch, and they still get out and run. Everybody has two great big dogs at least, or more.
Now, Heber, before the break, you were talking about when the company moved the houses and everything down here. Could you tell a little bit more about that? You have personal memories. Were you working for the company at that time?
Yes, I was. I was working for the company, but I didn't live in their particular town. They didn't have any buildings that was large enough for my family. So we rented in Cascade, and then we come over here and rented. I got my first home was at Old Meadows. It's on the southeast corner. There's a road that goes down to what I think it's a veterinary clinic now. That used to be the Meadows School. Well, there was a building on that corner. It was just a 3-room house, but that was the first one. And they had a nice garage out in back. We got to use part of that. So the 2 years we stayed there, and then I came over. It happened that there was a vacant lot right beside of our place that was owned by George Mitchell, that lived down here on this county road. I was renting from him, and when I come over here and got looking for houses, I found a big house that was big enough for us down at the end of Ohio Avenue, belonged to George Mitchell. So we rented that for about, well, I bought the home across the street in 1950, so we was there.
So when you were, we keep saying the company, we're talking about the Boise Payette Lumber Company. Everybody has been calling it the company for a long time, but what was your job when you worked for them?
Well, I started out plowing brush and doing just any kind of work. I had to go back down to Cabarton and help dig up water lines that they hadn't moved and straighten some things out there and haul them back. And if they had any little chores to do, mostly plowing brush though, then eventually got to setting chokers. And I got along with Earl Marker, was a heck of a good cat skinner. He had an old 60 cat, a gas cat. And he let me drive it a little bit and taught me how to set chokers, bless his heart. I just think a lot of him. And after I got that, I drove cat, and then I finally went and saw him. And I sawed with the crosscut saw, and eventually they got a big, it was a heavy electric saw. And they had a D4 or D2 cat with a generator on it with about 100 or 110 foot of cable. We would situate that in a group of timber that we looked at so that we wouldn't fall one on it. And we'd fall all the timber. But they wouldn't let us buck them because this saw, if you got it caught in there, you couldn't get out. You couldn't pull the handle out. It had a solid handle on the other end.
Yeah.
So we had as much as 8 people bucking logs behind us. We just do the falling.
With the crosscut?
With the electric saw.
No, they were bucking them with the crosscut?
Yeah, they had to cross it.
Yeah.
Then they got the big distance saw. It was pretty light. It only weighed 120 pounds.
Was it self-contained? Was it
Pardon me?
Was it a gas motor?
Yes.
Yeah.
The distance come, and then later on, as smaller McCullochs and stuff was 65 pounds. They got them down. The last one I had was what they called a 721 Homelite. Weighed 21 pounds and had 7 horsepower.
A lot of those early ones did have a handle on the other end. It took 2 guys to pack them around and run them.
It did. That big distance had to have a handle, but when the McCulloch come out, it was a beaver tail on the end that side went around. You saw low. Up until that time that they came, you saw partners. You had 2 on the falling with the same saw, like you did the crosscut. Then when these 65 pounds come out, they start sawing by themselves.
Yeah. Those old saws about vibrate your hands off too, wouldn't they?
A little bit.
So what you must have memories of Cabarton, and then after Cabarton they moved to McGregor, is that right?
Yeah, they made their own town about 2 miles south of Donley. From Cabarton up, and McGregor was the superintendent of the logging at that time. They named the town McGregor, and they had their own system, water system, sewer, I think. And they had a little store that Les Lady had over there alongside the highway. And when they moved over here, Les Lady come over and had a little station here at Meadows. They moved most of that on the railroad. They had the old building that they had as a kind of a company building for plays and stuff. They had the first senior center in it. When that come over, I think half of that went off the railroad car, so it demolished that and they brought it in. They had to rebuild it and set it up down there. And they used it for all kinds of purposes. But we had our senior center in there, and you ought to send the video. We asked for a loan to build this building, and one of the things that influenced them was they had a bowling ball, and we started to end that old building and rolled it, and it just went like this right down the road. And that really convinced them that we had to have something else.
Now, during this time that McGregor was established, were you living in Cascade?
Yes.
And so you just lived there, you didn't move with the company?
No.
I see. So were you involved when they moved down here? Were you involved in that at all?
No. Just my own family.
Yeah. So were you working for them at that time?
Yes.
Yeah.
We drove back and forth on the log in our own cars from Cascade. They never furnished our transportation until they got over here and started. Then they got the union to come along and they started furnishing transportation for us to go out to work.
Well, isn't the Martin under the lake over there now?
No.
I think it's
No, it's below.
bandwidth.
It's down below Cascade.
Well, it's down below Cascade.
Yeah.
Well, one of the places I thought that moved over here was,
Well, Vanwick, Idaho was out across over the hill from Cascade. They went over where next to the golf course and the highway, went out through the valley, and they had a little town of Vanwick out there. At one time it was bigger than Cascade. They had lots of businesses in there, and that was for the railroad. And after the railroad come, they kind of moved back over to Cascade, like Donley and Roseberry. And then, of course, when they put the dam in, that flooded Vanwick. But the first person that I met here, my brother-in-law was superintendent of the fish hatchery about 5 miles north of Cascade. And he wrote to us and said that a big new logging company was starting up over here and there's going to be hiring lots of people, and I was having trouble finding work. So we decided to come over and try it. We got over here too early, of course, and had to go back. But I had a former uncle that had a store in Photoshop in Cascade. And he knew that I was going to be looking for work, and he knew Wyman Meisner, who was superintendent of the Boy Spent Lumber Company at the time. And they said as soon as we get started working, well, we'll give him a job. And one day I was taking care of the store there for my Uncle George, and this great big guy come in and he said hi, and I said hi, and he said, "Is George around?" And I said, "No, he's out for a while." He said, "Can I do something for you?" And he said, "No, I don't think so." I said, I recognized him from what they told me. I said, "Are you Mr. Meisner?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Well, I'm the guy that he was asking you about getting a job." "Okay, lad," he said, "get your bunk and we're going to town, go out to camp right now." And I told him I had a way to get to work, so that's when I started working.
Now, you were talking about that store that's at the Old Meadows now. How was it brought down there? Was it hauled by the company or was it?
You know, I just don't remember whether they built that here or whether it was hauled over. They had 3 buildings ladies had there, the store and a dwelling, 2 dwellings, and I think they had a shed there too, on that corner. I heard it's all been sold now, but I heard that, I think Margie told me that the vote officially, one of the last owners, son, daughter-in-law, was moving where?
Devoto lives out at Old Meadows now, and I don't know, I guess the son and daughter-in-law still live over in Donley, but they have got rid of their cafe and all of their business in there.
I'm not sure about the building you're talking about there, where they had a service station.
Yeah, it was a service station.
It's just, as you go into Old Meadows and make that little turn, it's that first place on the left.
Yeah.
Building.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that it was Is what?
It was a store and a service station, and they even had a little bar in the back.
Hmm.
Just a little counter where they served beer.
Yeah. How long ago did it close down? It looks like it's been closed for quite a while.
I don't remember when it closed. It's been closed for a long time.
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Lady was Lotus' parents.
Oh,
Her married name changed.
Les Lady?
Yeah.
That's lady, yes.
Was he the owner before it was down here, or was it after?
He owned the one over in McGregor,
Yeah.
and then they came over here and they had the same kind of a deal here. They had groceries and things like that. We traded with them there in the store.
Do you remember any good stories about when they were moving down the grade and building it? Now, one story I heard is they ran out of rails and they had to take them up behind it and move it up to the...
They didn't break that up before they got over here, because I remember they had a kind of a celebration here when they joined those two tracks. The president of both railroads was here at the depot. I wasn't there, but I've been told by Cliff Evans was the depot agent, and he told me stories about this. It's the first time the two lines had ever been connected, a solid loop around there. And it was quite a mark in history that they had this coming over that mountain with all those buildings.
Was that a regular gauge line or was it narrow gauge?
Regular gauge. They got away from the narrow gauge a long time before I started working.
Yeah. Did they ever run a train or did they ever use that line up to Long Valley from here that you know of?
As soon as they got the buildings all over there and their equipment, why they tore the track up and brought it over and started building railroads to go logging.
Yeah. Do you remember any of the Shea engines? Were they still Shea logging?
I saw all four of them.
Yeah?
Yeah, they had one they never used, but they used three at one time,
Yeah.
and two quite often. And I knew the engineers and the fractmen and all of them. It was quite a deal. Well, another instance, when I first went to work, I was doing piling some brush up in Flat Creek, and Henry Love was the foreman there. And at noon hour, I sat down to eat my lunch on a bench, and this Shea come by. And all at once, something stung me like heck in the back of the neck, and I couldn't see any bees around, and I thought, that's funny. And then about 5 minutes later, right across about 50 yards ahead of me, a little fire started. And I thought, well, gee, I wonder if I should do something about that. And I said to myself, you're just a newcomer, you better sit tight. So I did. God, all at once, Henry Love come out of there and he said, who started that fire? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, was it the Shea? And I said, Shea who? I didn't know what a Shea was. But anyway, I had to stay and keep the guys I was riding with late. We had to put the fire out.
Well, who were some of the old timers that you remember that ran the Shays, or was some of the old time loggers that were here?
Well, Bid Nolan was the brakeman and on the #1 train, or the engineer on #2 train. And Barnes, do you remember the engineer on that first one? McFall. He was the #1 engineer. And then they had, can't remember, they had 1 or 2 brakemen, and one of them, if they had to have the third Shea, they run the third one. But that was very, very, it wasn't very much of it. I don't remember just how long it was out.
So they had an engineer and a brake. What would the brakeman do? Was he hooking cars and stuff?
Oh,
like that?
no, they were feeding coal.
Oh. So
Those things took a lot of coal.
he was a fireman and brakeman or whatever.
Yeah, the brakeman and fireman never got out. They had a brakeman that rode the back of the train and done all the switching for him.
So was there an engineer, a fireman, and a brakeman?
Yes.
It took 3 guys to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Up in Flat Creek, they built quite a steep grade on that. Then they had a spur on the side of it so they could go up one of those different arms of the country to log. And it was coming down with a load of logs one time, and somebody turned the switch the wrong way and that chaise started up on that one shut and then flipped right over on its side, right in the middle of the track on the load. And I remember, I think I got pictures of that somewhere, I don't know for sure, but that was quite a remarkable time too.
Now, was that up on a hillside, or was that down where it was switching onto the main?
It's on the hillside, right up the mountain.
So would they come up along a hillside and then switch back to go up the other way?
Oh,
Use a switch to do that?
well, I was out to make a big circle of some kind, or whatever they could,
Do you suppose that's where the name switchback came from?
I imagine.
Had somebody ask me that a while back, and I had to tell them I had no idea, but that makes sense. I don't know.
Well, John Fields tell you a lot about those shades, I'm sure, maybe more than I can.
Who's that?
Johnny Fields.
The fisherman.
Any questions?
Dale, I understand that a number of the people who came over with the company were not, how shall I say, were not national residents yet.
Oh,
And I wondered if Mrs. Gilderoy had any stories about trying to get some of them registered.
No, I didn't. Wherever they took me to register people, they seemed to be all ready to vote and register, and I didn't run into any of them. But there could have been, and I didn't know it.
you're talking about people that were in the country illegally?
Well,
What about Colorado?
hadn't gained their American
Word
citizenship yet.
citizens, yeah. Huh.
So I could have registered some of them illegally, but I didn't.
Imagine that. So, what are the stories? I hadn't heard anything about this. Was there supposedly a certain percentage of the people that worked for the company who
Well, I understand there were, yes, some, but
were they from any particular country or anything?
I'm not,
Irish?
I don't have enough information, I don't know.
Huh. I hadn't heard anything about that.
Don could tell us.
There's quite a group of people that came with the old Wyman lumber company. Some of them was from Sweden, and some of them was from Bulgaria, and we had names like Pete Kolak, Mike Sinovich, the White family, which come from Sweden. Newt White was from Sweden. In fact, Klaus White, senior now, wasn't a legal citizen of the United States until about 1960. He was 2 years old when his dad brought him over here, brought his mother and his dad over here. So, yeah, there was a group of people that came with the old boys at lumber company that had a very, and they was all immigrants from different countries. And most of them actually came from Nova Scotia down through the Midwest and then to the west.
Had they come from logging families over
They
there?
came with the loggers, yeah. That's the way
Nasco worked on the railroad.
Yeah.
Our neighbor was Kelly Keenoff, and he came from Bulgaria, and he came over on the boat when he was to America when he was 18 years old, and just worked and traveled until he ended up here in Meadows Valley, and then he met Ethel Keenoff and married her, and they lived by us until she died. We lived in this company house down here in Morgantown, and then he moved up to with his son. But a lot of those were Austrians that came from, like John just said, they came from the old country. And they were all single when they came. A lot of them were still single after they lived here all these years. Pete Kolak and John Gordoff, they never married, had they?
No, not the
Uh-huh.
Little Louis Sadoff.
And then Louis Sadoff, yeah, they were all bachelors and worked for the company for Boise PM and then Morgan for, and never married.
I also had a crew that did nothing but build railroads. By another Austrian, Big Mike they called him, he had his own crew. And I don't remember they used to lay those rails and put down the ties and build railroads all day long, and then at night, why he'd have a couple of gallons of beer out there, and they'd have their beer in the evening and before they went home.
Yeah.
But it was his sole job, just building railroads.
What was his last name?
I don't know.
They called him Big Mike.
Big Mike,
What they used for ties? did they
Road
just use-
10% of it.
well,
Big Mike, little Mike.
they had people hewing ties for years, several different people were hewing ties by hand, and
Really?
they gathered them up, and they used them a lot. And most of all of them was hand hewn.
There weren't too many of them that they saw it in the mill, huh?
No, not very many.
What they use is big axes or
They had
pads?
rod axe, and they were very skilled at it too.
Yeah.
They wouldn't vary in width very much, I'll tell you.
I suppose they reused them all they could, huh?
Every one of them that they could.
Yeah.
The crew would pick up the track behind and go build the ones out in front.
Yeah.
That's Jack and Dave's Pan, their brothers, running the railroad. Me and my buddy were working there, and Dave got hurt, and they took him to the hospital. And next morning, we getting ready to go to work, and I asked Jack, I said, how's Dave? He said, oh, he's dead by now, let's get to work.
Well, that's interesting. It sounds like it's a pretty big chunk of New Meadows history when the company moved in and the ethnicity of the people that were working for them and stuff.
Dale, I think when we do the one on logging, I think all of this will be brought out, because there's a lot of names and people that actually came to the logging company here and there's not very many of them left. 2, 3, 4, 5, I think there were 6 little cabins there, and they was all people that worked for the company, but they was all bachelors and had came from the Boise Basin even, as the company worked their way north. But I think that for all general purposes, when we do the one on the logging in New Meadows, that'll take in all of this.
Yeah, good. Sounds like.
And it's interesting, it really is.
Okay.
So what was the climate between the people in New Meadows once the railroad came in New Meadows with Burr? And you had people in town, and then you had people who were out on the ranches. What kind of a relationship did you have with them?
Good, they took cattle out of here on the train and everything for years. Talked to them,
I don't think there was very much friction, and the people that come in, the people here, they all looked alike. There might have been a little difference in their speech, but it was accepted, I'm sure, and they had a town of their own, and it was almost as big as New Meadows, so New Meadows didn't have any choice. They either went along or, and they, as far as I know, they got along fine. Of course, that was another job of mine, was attending the Saturday night dances. I had to stay up sometimes till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and some of them got pretty rowdy, I'm telling you. One night, for instance, 2 guys got in a fight, and I told them to quit, and one went the other, and I started home, and pretty quick somebody yelled, and they was back at it again. So this first Valley Mercantile that they had on the corner up here, that's where the grocery store is now, it had a corner. The building was square, but the corner was kind of cut off, and they had a big pillar out here holding up that end. Well, I handcuffed one of them to that and took the other down and told him to go home and go to bed.
They hadn't been drinking.
Oh, no.
Well, it sounds like since when the lumber company came in, the population increased so much. Is that kind of when New Meadows started making some of the improvements that you were talking about and started being a little more sophisticated as a town? And
They really hadn't done much until about 1950, when I started, because they could see the handwriting. The roads were terrible, and they had to do something because it was growing and had bigger schools and bigger turnouts and everything. So that's when Carl thought about having somebody that was in charge of what went on here as permanent employees. Otherwise, they never had a permanent employee.
They had a city council though before
They had the
that?
city board, they called them, yes. It wasn't the mayor, it was just chairman of the board. It wasn't, I don't think, even incorporated till years later.
Oh, yeah. Huh. That's pretty interesting. Well, it's 9 o'clock, shall we kind of wrap this up? Are there any more questions or comments from the audience?
Where's Flat Creek?
Where's Flat Creek?
Flat Creek? Oh, it's way over in Valley County, kind of east of Donley, out in that area. Gold Fork, Flat Creek, all in the same area.
In the pictures over there, there's a couple of school pictures, and then there's one of